This year when I was at Gen Con, I remember at some point in the vendor's hall, I saw this big poster for a game called Quartermaster General. It looked like a war game, and I thought, yes, a war game. I want to know more about this game because there are just so few war games that are presented at Gen Con. Then I had a look at the game, and there were people playing it, and I thought, really? Do I really need another game like Risk? It looked like that kind of game. It looked like a game about war, but it just looked so abstract that I was uninterested, so I decided to pass. Later, after Gen Con, a friend of mine asked me, well, did you pick up a copy of Quartermaster General? Did you have a look at it? I admitted I hadn't. And at that point, also the person said, well, maybe you will like it. My first reaction was like, what kind of person do you think I am that I would like a game like that? But I decided to pick up a copy nevertheless, and I played it. Quartermaster General is indeed a game that at first sight seems pretty abstract and may look like over ambitious. It represents the whole world with a very simplified map, and it has the aim of representing all of World War II in a manageable playtime. All World War II in a single game night with simple rules that you can easily teach to non-war gamers. This could be a disaster, this could be pure genius. I don't see how it could be much in between. Could be an epic fail, but if this game manages to do what it attempts to do, then this would be something remarkable. All of World War II playable in a single evening with non-war gamers. Is this possible and all? Well, let me show you how the game plays first, tell a little bit about the rules and the main concepts, and then we'll try to answer that question in the conclusions of this video. There are 6 countries in the game: Soviet Union, United States, and United Kingdom, and they work as a team. And then, unsurprisingly, you have Germany, Italy, and Japan. They form the Axis, and they are the opposing team. All 6 countries will always be in all games, so if you have 2 players, then a player plays all of the allies, and the other player all of the Axis countries. 6 players, a country per player. Anywhere in between, you divide up countries based on instructions that you find on the booklet. So some players will have more countries, some players less. Some players will still have to control multiple countries. Each country is represented by some wooden pieces indicating the units that the country controls, and there are 2 types of units: land armies and navy units, represented by tanks in these ships. Countries have different numbers of units depending on their historical capabilities. So, for example, Soviet Union has many more land units than naval units. United Kingdom has more naval units, and so has Japan. Not just the composition, but also the number of units is different depending on the historical situation of the country. Italy, for example, has really not many pieces. Also, each country has a deck of cards which represents the economy of the country. You will have a hand of cards in your hand. Each turn you will draw cards from the deck. You will have a chance of discarding cards so that you get better chances of getting new cards. But if you discard cards more than you need to, because you want better cards, you're also going through your deck faster, which is not a big deal if you have a big deck like Germany or the United States. It is a little more problematic if you have a small deck like Italy. Italy has the smallest deck in the game, because if you do not have cards left in your deck and there is a game effect that forces you to discard cards, then you have to discard them from your hand. If you have no cards whatsoever in your deck or in your hand, and there are game effects that force you to discard cards, then you lose victory points for each card, a point per card that you are not able to discard. Now, there's a board here too. May not look much like the board of a war game, but a war will happen here. The board represents pretty much all of the world. It is divided in large areas And some spaces are indicated by a star, marked by a star, and those are supply spaces, particularly important. Each country also has a home space: Moscow for the Soviet Union, United Kingdom for the United Kingdom, Germany for Germany. And you start the game with a piece, with a land army in your home area, in your home base. And units to remain on the board need to be in supply. A unit to be in supply needs to be able to trace a line of units to a supply source. So if you're in a supply area, then that's good for you. In this case, for example, if the Soviets are like this in this situation, then they're able to trace a line of supplied units to Moscow. But units, if they stretch out in such a way, can easily be left without supply if the supply line is cut at any point. For sea units, for naval units, the same rule applies. They need to be able to trace a line of supply units to a source of supply, and they can use other units to do that, to extend their supply lines. But there is an extra component here. That is, in order to be in supply, a naval unit also needs to be able to be adjacent to a supplied land unit. So for example, in this case, this unit here is in supply, but this naval unit here would not be in supply, because even though it can trace a supply line to an adjacent unit, friendly unit, there are no land units around here. So if this is the situation, you would need first to place, for example, a land unit there. Then you would be able to place a unit there which is in supply, because then you can trace your line, and you are adjacent to a land unit. This is very important for naval units, because when you're placing a new naval unit on the board, it has to be in a supplied area. Now, at the beginning of the game, you draw 10 cards, you discard 3, and you start with a hand of 7. During your turn, you select a card from your hand, you play it, and you resolve the effect. Cards are build an army. When you're playing the card, you simply add an army adjacent to one of your present armies. Build a navy, then you add a navy units to the board in an area where you have supply. You can perform a land battle, then you simply choose an enemy unit which is in an area adjacent to one of your armies. You play the land battle and you remove the enemy unit. Sea battle, similar, you choose an enemy navy unit which is adjacent to one of your armies or one of your navy units, and you remove the enemy sea unit. And then you have other things that do not add or remove armies necessarily. They do various stuff. You have event cards, you simply play them and you resolve the event described in the card. You implement the instructions on the card. Status cards, you play them in front of you, and usually they change the status of your country. They give you advantages that last for longer, for the rest of the game, unless something happens, and apply every time that the conditions described in the card apply. Response cards, these are tricky. You play them face down in front of you as your card play for a turn, and they activate whenever the condition described in the card applies. At that point, you reveal it like a booyah, surprise, peekaboo, whatever it is, the kind of like war cry that you want to apply to the situation. You show it when the situation applies and you implement the effect. For example, suppose that the Russians have prepared this card, and then the Germans attack and the Germans destroy a Soviet army in Russia. No sir, the Russians reveal this, and then the Russians do not have to remove a Soviet army in Russia this turn. There's a similar card for Stalingrad, for example. The Russians do not have to remove an army from Ukraine if there is a card effect, if there is an attack that would destroy otherwise the army in Ukraine. Also, economic warfare. Not all countries are equally good at this. Not all countries have the same amount of these cards. The United States are pretty good. These are attacks that will damage the the economy of an opponent, you play the card and you simply implement the effect. For example, this card here represents bombers. To use it, you must have an army within 3 spaces of an axis home space. The country must discard the top 4 cards of its draw deck. So there are game effects that hurt the economy of the opponents that will force the opponent to discard cards, and therefore the opponent will go through his deck faster. When you are doing that to Germany, that may not be so terrible. Japan is particularly vulnerable to that. The deck of cards that Japan has is not particularly huge, and so one of the strategies that the United States player can use when attacking Japan is to expand into the Pacific to gain a good position, and then to use the position to play bombardment cards against Japan, and that can really damage the economy of the Japanese player. So you play your card for the turn, adding units, launching battles, resolving other game effects. After that, you check supply. Your units that are not in supply at that point are removed from the game. Then you collect victory points that you collect by controlling supply areas. If there is an area where you're alone in a supply area, then you gain 2 points for that supply area. Allies can be in the same areas, in which case when you're scoring during your turn, then your unit only collects 1 point, and the other ally, when it is his turn to collect points, will also score 1 point. That means that each supply area will only generate 2 points per turn. You collect them all if you're alone, you collect only 1 if there are 2 players, but the total remains the same. Also, there can only be 1 army of a player in a single area, but you can have armies of allied players, of players on the same team in the same area. So German and Italian, Russian, American, and armies from the United Kingdom can potentially share an area. After the victory points taps, you can discard as many cards as you want from your hand. Hooray! But you need to be careful, because discarding too many cards can be very tricky, can leave your economy seriously damaged. After you're done doing that, discarding as many cards as you want, you draw cards up to 7, so that your hand will have 7 cards, and then it is the next player's turn, and the player will go through the same procedure. Playing a card and resolving the effect, checking supplies, collecting victory points, discarding cards, and drawing new cards. The game continues like this up to a maximum of 20 turns. At that point, the team or the 2 sides that has the highest amount of victory points is the winner. There is also another condition that may end the game earlier. If one of the 2 sides, the Allies or the Axis, occupies 2 home areas belonging to the other side, then that side wins the game immediately. You pretty much won the war by occupying key areas that belong to the opponent. This game is an achievement. From a technical point of view, this game is nothing short of a miracle. I really did not believe that you could have a game with such a simple set of rules, such an abstract looking map, such a small number of units on the board, such simple cards. All of combat is a card that says land battle or sea battle. I did not believe you could have such a simple set of elements coming together in what feels like a representation of World War II playable in an evening with non-war gamers. This is incredible. I think that the designer did an unbelievable work in summarizing things, in making a synthesis of historical events in all the elements of the game. The different economies being captured by the different size of the decks of the players, and in each deck there has been so much care that has been put in the type of events that players have, the composition of battles, of economic warfare, of responses, certain countries being excellent at something and terrible at something else, countries being kind of okay about this and that, being able to manage a little more eclectically. You do not have to worry about memorizing a lot of rules about economic systems and this movement rule and that rule to be able to execute this or that. Everything has been factored in: the number of cards, the composition of your deck, the number of play units available to you. You do not have to learn about all of those things. You learn about the very basic concepts, you start playing the game, and then the interaction of your cards, the units, the map, and the things that the players are doing creates the experience. You just see as World War II unfolds. To me, it's almost preternatural to see how, from such a simple set of elements, the players are faced with challenges that feel so right, that feel so similar to what the historical counterparts of the players had to face. The British can choose between investing and doing stuff in Europe or concentrating in Southeastern Asia, and they can drag other countries into the war. They can activate India, they can activate Australia, they can try to fight against the Japanese in that area, preventing them from expanding and from gaining a lot of supply areas. The United States player also has to choose where to go, hopping from island to island in the Pacific and trying to get close enough to inflict some serious damage on Japan is definitely a sound strategy, something that you would probably want to try to do. But at some point also, as a United States player, you will probably want to redirect your efforts towards Europe, in which Germany and Italy are just happily dominating things. And I talked about the cards. Isn't it just not just about, well, I play this card, it creates an event, hooray. The status cards also create very interesting situations that last for long. For example, there is a card that makes Northern Europe profitable for the German player. If the German player plays that status card that stays in play, then the German player will gain points from keeping control of Northern Europe, which is an area that otherwise wouldn't be all that interesting. Then the Allies may try to take that back from the Germans. The Axis are pretty powerful. Their grip on Europe is not easy to break. They may expand in North Africa too. The Russians, when you look at the board, sometimes the Russians will have like one unit on the board, sometimes no unit whatsoever. And yet the Soviet machine is working because there are a lot of response cards, a lot of these tricky things that the Russians can pull against the Germans to destroy German units, prevent them from advancing. You really have this sense, which just works so well, of the initial Greek of the Germans as they easily advance towards east, and then they always feel like they should already be in Moscow, and somehow it's very hard to get there. They get there for a second and then boom, they get out of the map because there are just so many response cards that the Soviet player has. And that really gives you again the sense of, well, look at the battlefield, it looks like the Germans are dominating, and yet at some point the German advance stops and the Soviet pushback may take place. You may never have read a book about World War II, you may not know much, but you look at your cards, you look at the objectives, you will start acting along those lines. And yet along those lines, you will not feel incredibly excessively forced to do things in a certain order, in a certain way. You still have enough flexibility that you do feel that you are in power. You're dealing with a set of challenges which mirror historical challenges economically, by which I mean synthetically, in a minimalistic way. They mirror those in that way, and yet they do so beautifully because the overall effect is impressive. It is astounding. To me, this is a war game. Grognards out there, get over it. I don't care all the complaints that you will send me. This is a war game. I'll say it as loud as I need to. It feels like a war game. It may not look like one, but as I play it, I feel like I'm playing a game about the topic that the cover and everything the game promises I'd be playing. I had the sense that I'm playing World War II. This is the most synthetic description, representation of World War II that I know that still feels historical. Of course, you could have even simpler, more minimalistic game. You may have a game in which you roll a die, and if it's odds, the Axis win, and if it's even, the Allies win. But simpler than this would probably not feel much like World War II. This one has an incredible balance there, has an incredible and unbelievable ratio between the simplicity of the rules and how much thematic feel comes out of this. Quartermaster Journal is highly recommended. This is going somewhere, don't know yet where, but it is going in my video for the top 10 war games of 2014. I really enjoyed this game a lot. Surprisingly enough, it even plays well as a solitaire game. You play all sides with advantage that when you're playing one side, you went through all the other, throughout one country you play through all the other countries. You may not remember exactly what the next country has in hand. You pick up the hand of a country, you play that, put that down, move past. Usually I only enjoy to play multiplayer games in solitaire when they're two-player games. I find it very hard to find multiplayer games with more than 2 players that play well as solitaires, and I just found one in Quartermaster General. I only have good things to say about this game. This is a very impressive design. I don't often play all of World War II in a single evening with no wargamers, but when I do, I'm playing Quartermaster General.